Wouldn't it be great if we could prevent our users and customers from accessing websites that were either inappropriate or out of policy or could cause harm to their computer? The answer is absolutely yes. And we have a feature like that called URL filtering that we're going to discuss and then demonstrate in this nugget. Let's begin. In most companies, a user like Bob is going to be signing an acceptable use policy that defines what he's allowed to do and not do. And as part of that, it's very likely they're going to talk about computer use and network use and access to the internet and what's allowed and not allowed. And by implementing URL filtering and controlling it here at the Palo Alto Firewall, we can assist Bob in maintaining the rules that he agreed to. For example, if one of the restrictions was for Bob to not go to any news websites, and we'll just use that as an example instead of like pornography or other types of categories that would be very inappropriate for somebody to do from work. If that was the policy regarding no news sites, we can enforce that at the firewall. Now, it does require a license for the URL filtering feature, and we also want to make sure that we're doing updates so that our Palo Alto has the latest and greatest information. And with those items in place, the two basic things that we're going to do is we are going to create a URL filtering profile. And in this profile, we can specify the categories of what types of sites are allowed, and more specifically, what types of sites are not allowed. So in our example, we could tell the Palo Alto that any sites that have been categorized as a news website should not be allowed, meaning Bob should not be allowed to access them. And once we create that profile, we'll then go to a security rule that we have that's allowing Bob to go out to the internet at all, and we're going to attach that profile to the existing policy. So it's sort of like an add-on, an added feature once we've identified a permit statement that Bob permission-wise is allowed to go out to the internet, for example, for web browsing. If we tack on the profile to that policy, it's also going to consider the category before it makes that final yes decision to forward the traffic. You know what would be a good idea? It would be to verify our baseline that Bob can get out at all, and just to verify that under policies with security. From our previous nuggets together, we've got a Facebook rule. We also have a web access to server 1 on the DMZ, and we also have a rule number 3, users going to the internet. So what we could do is we could create a URL filtering profile and then slap it in, or attach it, if you will, to rule number 3. So let's just verify for a moment that Bob currently can get out to the internet. So let's bring in Bob's computer, and let's just open a browser, and let's go out to realclearpolitics.com. And that seems to work. Now, if one of the questions we have is, okay, Real Clear Politics, what category does that fit into? Is that a news category or not? I'll show you how to solve that here in a moment as well. So now we have our baseline. Bob's computer does have access to the internet. Let's go ahead and minimize Bob's computer screen for a moment. And let's verify that we have a URL filtering license as well. So if we click on Device, and then over on the left, if we scroll all the way down near the bottom, we've got the Licenses option. And it currently says that it is active, so that part looks great. So let's create our URL filtering profile object. And to do that, we're going to go to the Objects tab. And with the Objects tab selected, we are going to go over here on the left down to URL filtering under Security Profiles. So we'll click on URL filtering, and you'll notice that we have a default URL filtering profile object. And it's got some pretty good stuff in it by default. Check this out. It's filtering or blocking on all of these categories. Now, this profile, this default profile for URL filtering, has not yet been applied to any security policy. But what we could do is we could apply this one, or we could create a new one. In fact, what we can do is we can start with what's in the default. And a great way to do that is to select the default URL filtering profile. And then we're going to click down here on the clone link right near the bottom. And then click on OK. So now we've got this default one, which we can select, and we can edit it. So let's name this our URL filtering profile. And because it was based on the default, it is currently blocking several things, including abused drugs and several others. And what we want to do for our example is block on the category of news as well. So if we scroll down, in fact, we can just search up here, type in news, and then click on the Go button here to apply that filter. Check this out. There's news right there. So we can click on it, and with it selected, instead of the action of allow, we'll go ahead and specify that we want to block it. Now, the other options, including alert, continue, and override, let's talk about those as well. If we specify the action of alert, the user is allowed access to the website, but there's also going to be an alert in the URL log, so we can be aware of it. The block one, what we're about to do, is pretty obvious. It doesn't allow the user to go to that website. The continue option allows the user to go to the page, except they have to press a little button to continue to go there. So it's more of a conscious effort that they really are intending to go to that site. And the override allows the user to access the block page after entering a password. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and specify block. And I'm going to clear the filter so we can see everything. And let's just scroll down to news. I just want to verify that the block action took. Sure enough, right there. And we'll click on OK. So now we've got this URL filtering profile that we just created. And the next step is to go ahead and apply this to a security policy rule. So we're going to go back to the Policies tab. And with security selected on the left, we're going to go ahead and edit the users going to internet rule, rule number 3 right here. So if we want to edit the rule, we can click here. That's one way of doing it. We can also click on the individual fields. And it's over here under Actions, where we would specify the action setting, which in this case is currently allow, plus we can also set the profile setting. This is where we can go ahead and attach the URL filtering profile that we created a moment ago. So under the profile setting, we'll use the drop down and let's select profiles. And there's a whole boatload of profiles that we can apply. Right now we're focusing on URL filtering profiles. So in the URL filtering section, we'll go ahead and use the drop down there. And there's our URL filtering profile, the one we created. So we'll select that and we'll click on OK. So if we scroll to the right, check this out. Now it's showing us for that rule, here's the action column and here's the profile with the little icon representing a URL filtering profile is attached to this rule. And if we hover over it, it's going to go ahead and indicate that it's URL filtering profile, and it also gives us the name of that profile. We can also click on it right here, and that would also specifically tell us the name of the URL filtering profile that's currently applied. So we can either click on cancel or OK here, either way is fine. And then we'll go ahead and commit this so the candidate configuration now becomes part of the running config once we confirm the commit. So we'll let that go ahead and cook. I'm going to go ahead and close that, and let's bring back Bob's computer. So we bring in Bob's computer. And let's test this. Now, oh, you know what? Let's do this. Before we bring in Bob's computer, just to confirm that Real Clear Politics is in the category of news, if we weren't sure, here's what we could do. If we go back to Objects, and on the left-hand side, select URL filtering, let's say we're editing our current URL filtering profile. There's a link right here where you and I can check the URL category that a site fits in. So let's just do that real quick, just to verify that Real Clear Politics falls into the news category that we're going to be blocking. So we'll click here on Check URL Category. That brings up a new browser window. Let's go ahead and type in www.realclearpolitics.com. And then we have a CAPTCHA code of UXTSN6. And we'll click on Search. And that shows us the current category that Real Clear Politics is in, which is news. So what should happen if Bob attempts to go to Real Clear Politics or any other news site that's in that category, as well as any other of the blocked types that are in that profile that we now have attached and associated with the security policy, it should be blocked. So let's bring Bob's computer in and let's give it a shot. So from Bob's computer, we'll open up a browser and let's go to www.realclearpolitics.com, press enter. And web page blocked. So this little message that popped up specifically is telling Bob that, hey, you were trying to go here, and that's in the category of news. And by the way, Bob, that's your IP address of 10.1.1.25 right there. And it's not in accordance with company policy. Now we can customize these messages that come up, so we don't have to accept the default text that's here. And what we're attempting to do with this is to help enforce company policy and also keep our users safe. If we know that certain sites have been categorized as malware or other types of sites that really should never be visited from a work computer, it's much better to have the Palo Alto firewall stop that traffic before it ever gets out. And with that, my friend, it is assessment check time. Take a moment, read these questions, come up with the best answers you can, and we'll review them together in just a few moments. All right, question number 1. What are the 2 major steps to implementing a URL filtering? And the first one is to create a URL filtering profile. And the second one is to slap it onto a security policy rule so that it becomes effective. So create the profile and then attach it to a security profile. Second question, are there prerequisites for URL filtering? And the answer is yes, there needs to be a license for that feature. That's the major prerequisite in order for your firewall to be able to support the feature. And question number 3, how do you know what category a site is in? And one of the ways of identifying which category a website goes into is to, when we're creating a URL filtering profile, simply click on the link to check a URL, plug in the URL, put in the CAPTCHA code, and it will tell us what category that website is in. In this nugget, we've discussed and demonstrated setting up URL filtering to control the categories of websites that our users are allowed to go to. I'm glad you joined me for this nugget. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.